How to generate the highest income with your RIA. That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 69. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where I help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you head over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all of the resources I make available, from the video series, podcast series. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of resources there for the taking. And again, as I noted with podcasts, if you are watching this on video and you prefer podcast format, if you search for the Transition to RIA podcast on all major podcasting platforms, you can find that as well. Again, transitiontoria.com has all of the resources. Okay, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about either you already have your own RIA or you're thinking about transitioning to become your own RIA, and you're mapping out that kind of future and what the structure of your firm is going to look like. And so the question is, how can I generate the highest income with an RIA? So that's what we're going to be talking about on today's episode. I have 5 kind of topics I want to go over. This is not going to be an exhaustive list of any and every way you possibly could manage an RIA. There's plenty of practice management experts out there that will get much farther in the weeds on some of these topics than I will here. But I do want to talk about 5 things because, again, whether you have your RIA and you're trying to refine your process now, or again, which is a lot of my audience, you are thinking about becoming an RIA, well, it's much easier to kind of build things out from the start with some of these things in mind, of how to generate that highest amount of income for your RIA. So at a high level, if our goal is to increase our income, which could kind of be defined 2 different ways, is it just total dollar amount in income we're trying to increase? And or is it our profit margin for every dollar revenue comes in, how much of that actually flows to the bottom line of income that we're trying to increase? And ideally, you pursue both of those. And you say, okay, well, how can we have the most maximum profit margin we can? And then how do we increase the size of the pie as well, so that bottom line dollar amount will increase as well? So just keep that in mind. And that's kind of the main focus of this episode is, okay, if we're going to increase income, we have to do one of 2 things, and ideally both of those. One, we have to increase revenues somehow. So I'm going to touch on a few topics there, and or decrease expenses in some fashion. Again, I'll touch on a couple of topics there as well. So the first one we'll jump into is increase in revenue. And there's 2 kind of just topics I want to talk about on today's episode on this. Again, not an exhaustive list of all the different ways you could grow your firm. But these are maybe some of the more unconventional things that people don't think about that I think are important to be able to grow your revenues, which again, that's a big part of the equation to increasing profits, is to grow your revenue. So the first one is to outsource where you can. And so what I mean by this is, as you look at your practice or your future practice, ask yourself, what are the non-client facing tasks that have to be done, or the non-value added tasks? So that there's a task that have to be done, but your client doesn't perceive as some sort of value add because it's something happening in the background. It's an operational task. Your client maybe doesn't even realize it's occurring, but it is a necessary part of running your own firm. So of those tasks, again, non-client facing, can you outsource those to someone else that can do it better for you, arguably cheaper for you? And one of the main reasons you want to consider that, you say, okay, well, I don't mind doing some of these things, or I could have team members do some of these things. But the reality is there's a lot of commoditized parts of running a modern day advisory firm. And again, a lot of that is not client facing, is not arguably value add to the client. It's value add to you. You have to do those tasks to keep the lights on, keep the firm running. But the reality is, because they're commoditized, your efforts, your team's efforts are not really doing those better, arguably, than someone else could do if you were to outsource it to them and do it on your behalf. And so you might say, well, why outsource? Why shouldn't I just do it myself? But the reality is, because if you outsource, that frees up your time to spend more time on business development efforts, that spends more time on working with existing clients, which will hopefully lead to more referrals. And so again, if it's you or your team and you're not adding value to the client directly or value that they perceive, you're better off outsourcing that. And I'll get into kind of how that's done to someone else. And so the example, and you might think, well, yeah, but if I outsource, I have to pay someone to do that. And is that going to be more expensive than me just doing it myself? And an example I'd give, just a general generic example is, let's say you have $1 million in fee revenue coming in. That's the size of your practice. And because of how you've structured it, maybe you've structured it pretty efficiently, and you're getting 70% margins from that top line every dollar that comes in. And you say, well, if I outsource, I'm going to have to pay someone to do some of these tasks. But the reality is, but if you outsource, if that would free up your time to grow your firm more, won't you be better off even if your profit margins are lower? So the example would be, if you're generating $1 million in fee revenue now and getting a 70% margin, well, would you rather have that scenario, or would you rather have a $2 million firm that gets 60% margins? Because again, maybe you're outsourcing, there's a cost there. So you say, well, my profit margins are down, but if that allows you, by outsourcing those tasks, allows you to grow your firm faster because you can spend more time on business development, fostering existing relationships, looking for referrals, those kinds of things, and you can grow your firm faster, is it not better to have a $2 million firm with 60% profit margins than a $1 million firm with 70% profit margin? So again, don't get caught up by just the sheer cost alone and say, well, if I outsource, I have to pay for that. Yes, you do have to pay for it. Now, in many cases, they can do it maybe more efficiently than you could even do yourself with your own team. But even if it was a net kind of cost to you, if that enables you to grow your firm faster, are you not better off when you can increase the entire pie much larger than you can maybe having to try to do everything yourself in-house? And so the question is, well, how does this work, or who are these providers? So there's kind of no universal term for these kind of outsourcers, for lack of a better term. So sometimes they're often referred to as middle back office firms. So those are firms that say, hey, you go start your own RIA. You do all the client-facing value-add tasks. You basically outsource to us all the commoditized tasks behind the scenes. We do those for you, freeing up your time for the reasons I just talked about, why that's beneficial to you. So that absolutely exists. There are providers out there that do that. And then you can even take it a step farther. There are RIA solutions that you can even plug into that will say, hey, not only will we do everything these kind of middle back office firms do, we'll also take it farther and do the compliance for your firm as well, so you don't have to be responsible for that, freeing up even more of your time. So as to which one of those might be best for you, every advisor situation is different. There's no single answer. So that's part of what I help advisors do, is to understand, okay, what is it you're trying to accomplish? What is your strengths? What are the things you would rather not be doing yourself? And which of these providers might be best for you? So know that these providers exist. Again, often referred to as middle back office providers. There are TAMPs out there now that do much more than just pure money management, that do a lot of additional tasks and resources for the RAs that they service. So that's a way to outsource as well. So just know that there are providers out there if that's something you want to explore. And just the kind of an extreme example I would give, there is a story, and I forgot, I looked it up to see the exact numbers or whatever the case was, but there's an advisor that had over $1 billion with a B in assets that significantly outsourced as much as possible. And I can't remember if it was just him, or at best it was him and maybe one other team member, maybe. And if that, it was at most one, and had $1 billion practice because he believed in outsourcing anywhere he wasn't adding value. So that was all the middle back office tasks. That was the managing the money itself. Everything he could outsource, he did, and he concentrated just on the clients. Now, were his profit margins as good as some other firms' profit margins? No, because he was outsourcing, paying someone else to do all these tasks. But as a result, he was able to grow his firm to over $1 billion in assets with this incredibly small footprint directly on his team. So just know that it absolutely is possible. Again, that's kind of an extreme example, but you want to think about these ahead of time. I was on a Zoom call just a couple of days ago, and I was telling this story in an advisor, a team who's about maybe a third of the size of this $1 billion. And they were saying, wow, we wish we had maybe done that early in our career, so that we could have had that faster growth by not doing all these things ourselves. And so I reminded them, I said, well, you used to have a lot of runway left in your career. So you haven't missed the boat. Yes, it might have been nice to do it from the very beginning, like this gentleman did, that grew to $1 billion. But just know that these solutions exist. Know that the idea is that they free up your time to focus on the things that will help you grow your firm faster. So again, a way to increase revenues is to actually outsource tasks that are not directly lead into you growing the firm. So the next kind of component of talking about how to grow revenues is marketing or business development. And so there's plenty of marketing people that are way smarter on this topic than I am that could give you all kinds of great tips on how to do things. But at a macro level, there's something I wanted to point out, again, for either if you're an existing RA now or if you're thinking about transitioning to the model, to make sure to not overlook, because again, the more business development, marketing, whatever term you want to use, you can do to grow your firm will, again, help you increase revenues, and then eventually that flows to the bottom line in income. So the analogy I give on this is, imagine you are in a one-on-one basketball game. So it's you and one other person there. You guys are a one-on-one basketball game. And for whatever the reasons, your opponent decides to voluntarily tie one of his arms behind his back. And so he or she's going to play with one arm tied behind their back because they voluntarily did that on their own. There's no reason you need to reciprocate. And so there you are with two arms. So you have an advantage over that person. Now, I would ask you, if you're in that situation, would you just voluntarily tie your own hand behind your back? Or would you say, hey, this is how basketball works. This is what's available to me. I have both arms. If you choose to tie one arm behind your back, I'm going to play as best as I can. So that analogy is what I see a lot in the RA space. So what I mean by that is, if you are an RIA, or again, you plan to become an RIA, you will have much more flexibility and advantages from a business development standpoint over the tens of thousands of advisors in the kind of traditional wirehouse type model. And what I mean by that is, in the wirehouse model, trying to do things like make videos, do podcasts, write articles in industry or periodicals, do email marketing, all kinds of things that are either not allowed, or it's so onerous to get approved and it's so slow, and you got to do things this old legacy style way of doing it, that they just don't do it. And then you have RIAs that can do all of that. But yet, interesting, a lot of RIAs have that flexibility, but are not taking advantage of it. They are choosing, and that so you can extrapolate my analogy. That wirehouse advisor has one arm tied behind their back. There's a whole lot of things they can't do that the RIA advisor can do, but many RAs are not taking advantage of that. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you're an RA now or becoming one, is to say, hey, what are things I can do out there from a business development standpoint that a lot of my competition, tens of thousands of advisors, cannot do, and yet I can do, and make sure you take advantage of that. And there are a lot of folks that just don't take advantage of it when it is available, when it's an unfair advantage they have over the competition, or a lot of their competition, to be able to do. And so I'm big on analogies. I'm a fan of the movie The Shawshank Redemption. Many of you are quite familiar with that. So if you recall, when Morgan Freeman's character Red gets released out of jail, and he goes and he's working in a grocery store, and he wants to go to the bathroom, and he struggles because for 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it was, he was in the prison, he had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. And so he's so ingrained of having these limitations that he struggles to go to the bathroom without asking someone to go to the bathroom. So he's asking his boss at the grocery store, hey, can I go to the bathroom? And the boss has to remind him, you don't have to ask permission, just go to the bathroom. That is something you will experience as an advisor. If you are in that wirehouse world, perhaps your entire career, and all of a sudden you go into the RIA world, it is this weird transition where you are so used to not being able to do things that all of a sudden you either forget, or it'll just seem unnatural at first to be like, oh, someone wants me to be a guest on their podcast. Okay, I will be a guest on their podcast. I don't have to ask permission. I don't have to be told no. I don't have to submit a script ahead of time, whatever the case is. And it will be this kind of weird, I call it the Shawshank example of a transitionary period. Now, don't get me wrong. You will quickly get over that after you kind of go through a couple cycles of that. And it's a very refreshing feeling of, wow, I do have this flexibility. But don't let yourself get trapped and just saying, over 20 years, I haven't been allowed to do all these things, or it's been so difficult, I haven't even bothered. All of a sudden, if that's available to you, take advantage of it. That will help you grow your firm in ways that a lot of your competition doesn't even have available to them. So at a high level from that market and business development, when you hear these market experts give a lot of tips and suggestions, just know in that RIA space, you typically will have the most flexibility of any affiliation model to pursue some of these strategies. Just make sure you take advantage of it. Again, a lot of folks, it's not even an option. So again, I encourage you to do that. It's a way to increase your business development efforts, hopefully increase your revenue as a result. Okay, now we're going to shift in, and again, this is not an exhaustive list. That's not by any means every possible way to increase your revenues, but I did want to give a couple ideas on each of these topics. So now we're going to shift over to decrease in expenses. So again, the more revenue you can make, well, the lower your expenses, the more profit you're going to have at the bottom line. So there's kind of three main chunks of expenses involved in a running RIA that I'm going to talk about here. And this is, again, not an exhaustive list. These are just three of the biggest ones. And I want you to kind of think about how you could kind of work through them. So they are real estate, the cost of having an office, your staff, your team members, and then the last one is money management. So to the degree you outsource money management to a third-party solution, that can be a big cost or in the overall cost structure of the fee you're charging. And there are strategies, if you're managing money yourself, there's strategies of how to maybe make that more efficient. I'm not going to dive too much into that on this episode. We're talking more about that kind of outsourcing and money management. So the first of those three is real estate. So, and by the way, COVID has changed everything when it comes to expectations with real estate, expectations from both your clients, expectations from your team members, expectations from yourself is what is necessary to run an advisory practice. And so just know that whatever you thought pre-COVID about what is mandatory to have from an office perspective, the entire world has changed, of course. We are now in a world with Zoom calls as a common day place, and virtual settings and all kinds of things. And I actually saw a survey just the other day. I should have came prepared and explained what the survey was or who put it out. But the takeaway from it was that there's now a majority of advisors now say that their clients would rather meet not in an office than the opposite. So there was a time that most clients, over more than 50% said, "Oh yeah, hey advisor, if we're going to meet, we want to meet in the office." Well, clients have now got used to whether it's talking on the phone or doing Zoom calls or whatever's more efficient, more helpful for the client, that now this survey showed that more than 50% of investor clients prefer things like Zoom and phone calls and whatnot, as opposed to having to drive down to the office. Now, it wasn't 100%. So in some instances, it still will be helpful to have an office. I'm going to give examples. But just know that that tide, of course, has shifted. COVID has changed everything with respect to what is possible. Now, here's the thing of real estate. Here's the dirty little secret with real estate, particularly, again, if you're not already in the RIA space, if you are at like a wirehouse firm, a W-2 type firm, where an office space is provided for you. Here's the dirty little secret. Real estate should be a fixed expense for you, not a variable expense. And so what I mean by that is if you are at that wirehouse world, you are receiving all kinds of services from the wirehouse. You're receiving compliance, for better or worse. You're receiving technology. You're receiving maybe some team members. You're receiving an office, and it might be a nice office. And for that, you're of course paying for that. And how you pay for it is in the payout. It's the inverse of your payout. I rant about that a lot in episodes and articles. So every dollar that comes in, your firm is retaining maybe 60% of that and giving you 40%. So that 60% is what is covering those services that they are providing for you. So one of those services is an office. But the dirty secret with that approach is as your revenue goes up, if you're doing strategies like I'm talking about, trying to increase revenue, or the market's going up, or you're having good success bringing on new clients, as your fees and commissions go up, well, so does the payout retention that your firm is keeping. And so part of that payout retention, among other things, we won't dive into all of them, is to cover your office expense. So as you bring on more clients, as you grow client accounts larger, the firm is retaining more revenue as a result of it, but yet your office doesn't really change. So the example would be, let's say, extreme example, let's say you double your fees and commissions from 1 year and a couple of years later, you've since doubled that. Well, you are contributing twice as much now into that slice that covers office space for you. but yet did they give you an office that is twice as big? Did they give you a conference room that is now twice as big? No, they don't at all. So you are paying, if you're in that environment, for office space on this variable component that the larger you grow, with the idea being that you should be growing over time. So you keep contributing more the larger you get to office space, even though likely your footprint is not changing at all. So what you need to be doing is you need to say, how can I make office expense a fixed expense? So if you go in that independent route, if you go down, have your own independent RIA practice, you cover the fixed expense. And the benefit is once you exceed that fixed cost every year, every dollar in revenue that comes in above that is incrementally more profitable, because that cost does not just keep going up like it does in the variable nature in the wirehouse world. So just something to keep in mind. That's one of the biggest expenses of running advice practice at office space. If you're paying for it on a variable basis, you are not at all getting, as they say, the operating leverage benefit that you can in that RIA space. So you want to make it a fixed expense. Now with that, the world has changed again because of COVID. So I want to give just a couple examples of what I'm seeing out there in the marketplace of ways to decrease that expense even further. There is no one answer. Some advisors will prefer one approach over the other. So I just want to give you a couple examples of what I'm seeing out there. So the first one, there are increasing number of RIAs that are going fully virtual, right? So they don't even have an office footprint. They maybe had one at one point. COVID prevented that for a year, 2 years, whatever the case is. Clients got used to maybe not coming in. And there are firms that are saying, hey, you know what? We actually don't even need an office space because all of our clients want to meet virtual, or maybe we'll go to the client, or we'll meet in some kind of third party location. And so we don't even need an office footprint. So that's the kind of most extreme example. But you can imagine if you could eliminate that cost altogether, how much that helps your profitability level. And there are a lot of RIAs doing that. And this is not just, you say, oh, that's just some startup RIA that doesn't have any clients yet and they're starting virtual. And that does happen. There's a lot that are doing it virtual and they're making it work. But there are a lot that are transitioning the model and rethinking, do I need this fancy office space? And again, some to the extreme example are going fully virtual. And you might be skeptical again. You might say, oh, that doesn't work. But let me give you the example of, and this is not my example. You hear this floating around a lot by different sources, or some variation of this. And so the example would be, you think, oh, I need an office footprint to get maybe a new client. So imagine you are kind of a general practitioner advisor there in town, and there's a dentist that you would like to earn their business and have them become a client of yours. And you do have this nice office, and it is, a good showcase of who you are. And you're trying to gain the dentist business. And so you're giving your value proposition to the dentist. Well, then it turns out the dentist learns about you, but also learns about maybe 3 states away. So they're not going to go see that person in person, that there's an advisor that solely focuses on dentists. Their entire practice is to serve the needs of dentists and the different advice that a dentist would need. But they are 100% virtual, which, by the way, is good because the local dentist is not going to drive 3 states over to see them. Who do you think that client might gravitate towards? The person that solely focuses on dentists, or you, even though you have the advantage perhaps of that office space? Arguably, that person is going to go to the niche provider. So that is, of course, a pitch. You hear it over and over again that, oh, you should specialize, you should have a niche. But just know that is an example of where it's very easy for clients to look past maybe a lack of a office footprint. If you think, oh, it can't be done, if your value proposition is so compelling to that particular advisor, it's actually better for them to maybe go multiple states away virtually to work with an advisor than have someone local there on the ground. So fully virtual is one approach. Then there are also advisors that are rethinking the traditional office footprint. And so you might have traditionally thought, well, if I break away and I'm going to start my own RIA, so I need an office, and I need a conference room, and I need maybe 5 offices because of the amount of members of our team. Whatever the case is, there's a lot of folks are rethinking that and say, hey, maybe we can do kind of a half and half. We're already meeting with a lot, if not most, of our clients virtually, but hey, maybe we do want that office footprint to a degree. We do have some clients that want to meet in person. Maybe you do feel comfortable that talking to new clients initially, that you want to bring them in for a face-to-face. And so there are advisors kind of taking a hybrid approach and say, hey, we're going to set up and be able to do a lot virtual, but we're also going to have a footprint, but that footprint's going to be smaller than it would have been had we been doing this 5-10 years ago. So maybe we do have a conference room, but maybe we only need 2 offices, and those will kind of be floater offices for whichever team members or advisors need to use them on any particular day. And so as a result, we can maybe have half the square footage of an office space than we once thought we needed to, again, lowering expenses as a result of that. So that's one way to do it. And then the third way I'd say is just get creative. So I'll give you two quick examples on this. Again, with COVID, everything's changed. You can get creative on this. So there's an advisor team I'm talking to, I've been working with for a while, that what their envision is right now, they are meeting with clients either virtually, they haven't broken away yet, but with COVID and everything, either virtually, or when they do meet with clients, the advisors themselves are members of a social club there in town. It's a very nice social club that you have to, I don't know what the exact amount is, but let's say it's $10,000, $20,000 a year kind of to be a member of this club. You get nice facilities. I don't know if there's maybe even a golf course attached to it. And so that was something the advisors were doing anyways, is being a member of this social club. And so because it's a nice facility, they would often ask their clients, hey, if you want to meet up, let's meet up at the social club, and we'll do our business there. And then to the degree that maybe a little more privacy is needed, they actually have rooms, facilities in the social club that the members, in this case the advisors, could reserve and use that as a place to meet with clients. So this team is pondering to say, hey, if we were to break away, maybe we don't need an office space at all, because we'll either do it virtually, again, by call, by Zoom, or other cases, or if and when the clients want to meet, we'll just use the nice facilities at the social club, which, by the way, we're already members of anyways. We're already spending the money on anyways. And that's where our clients like meeting us. So we'll just do that, and we won't even need an office footprint. So again, you can be creative in how you want to do this, because the world has changed with COVID. And then the other just quick example I'll talk about with real estate, and I think this trend's going to continue, is I call it the snowbird arbitrage. So a typical example is an advisor perhaps in the Northeast that more and more of their clients are gravitating down to Florida. That's where I am. A lot of folks head south as they maybe get older, or whatever the case is. And so the advisor themselves, in many cases, is now maybe has a home in Florida as well, and spending some of the time there. And so some of those advisors are pondering, well, if I were to break away, and now I need some sort of maybe physical location. Again, if they do want that, maybe it's a scaled down version. Well, as opposed to maybe being in like a New York, where it's more expensive to live with property tax and everything, maybe I'll make sure that I'm in Florida for a half of the year plus a day, as they say. I'll set up my more modest office size here. So one, I can decrease my real estate expenses just by doing that, decrease my property taxes, maybe state taxes, whatever the case is. And then if and when my clients were either meeting virtually, they're already in Florida themselves, or I can occasionally go back up and visit with them, perhaps in New York, if that's the case. And I think there's a lot of advisors that are at large wireless firms that have kind of been able to get away with that a little bit through COVID, because the regulators have been a little more flexible on location supervision. I think that's going to get tightened back up. And so those options are going to kind of go away to a degree if you're still at a firm. But if you leave and start your own independent firm, you absolutely could set up like that. And it's definitely a way to save on real estate costs and your overall costs as well. Okay, moving on. Again, I got 2 more things for how to reduce expenses. So the next one is on staff. So staff is typically a large expense of running an own independent practice. And this comes back to the outsource that I talked about at the top, where outsource where you can. So the question is, do you need as big of a staff as you might be envisioning? Because if you can outsource a lot of those tasks, you don't have to have the team members directly right there in the office with you. Now, again, you might want to separate those by say, hey, what is client facing? So it might be important to you, and I would understand that maybe you want that friendly face on your team member that sits there and welcomes any client or prospective client when they walk into the office, and that's important to you, and I can totally understand that. So you might not want to try to outsource that sort of role, but how many roles are behind the scenes that you could outsource, like I talked about at the top of the episode? And a couple components to that. Think about your either staff now, if you're already independent, or if you're going to go that path, is will you keep them busy 100% of the time? So that's typically hard to do, because you don't know when you're going to have people out, or when some days are more busy than other days. So your staff might only be running at, say, 70, 80% of capacity at any given point, which is just not efficient, because you were paying them for 100% work, and maybe there's only a need or an ability to do 70, 80% or whatever number you want to use of that. So the idea is if you outsource, the outsourcer can say, hey, we can fill our team members behind the scenes here because they might be spending a third of their day working on the task of this RA and a third of their day working on tasks of another RA and a third of the day over here. And they can make sure that there's enough tasks to be done to fill that one particular person's plate. That's much harder to do on your own is to run at full capacity. So again, where you can outsource and lower your footprint of team members directly, that's going to save you money in the long run because it'll be more efficient, essentially, workforce that you have available to you. Other examples with that, though, if you have the larger your team, the more chance you have to deal with turnover. Turnover is a fact of life for any business. It will happen eventually. That you will lose people, even outsourcing firms will lose people. But if you outsource, again, a lot of those non-value add, non-client face tasks to someone else, that's their problem to worry about. If there's turnover, they have to go out there and find talent. They have to train those people. They have to get them acclimated. You don't have to worry about that. Again, the less you're worrying about on things like that, the less you're dealing with maybe staff turnover, whatever the case is, the more time you can be out there working on value add tasks that will help you grow your firm. Again, a benefit of outsourcing. You also see it with things like vacation days, particularly if you have a smaller staff or team, maybe you have 3, 4, 5 people. Well, if one's out, maybe the others can't be out because they need to be there for coverage reasons. Next thing you know, you're dealing with all those kinds of issues. Again, to the degree you outsource tasks, that's their problem to worry about, their problem to make sure that coverage is there. You don't really care as long as the tasks are being done, whether one of the team members is out on vacation, the others are covering it. Again, that's someone else's problem to worry about. So again, just ask yourself if something's not client-facing or we're not adding value in the sense of that the client sees it as adding value, should we outsource that to someone else and free up our time to do more productive things to help grow the firm? So again, to the degree you can decrease your direct staff, that's a way to decrease expenses. And then the last item for this episode is, again, money management. So this is for those of you that say, hey, part of my value proposition is not to do the money management itself. I rely on third party, whether it's SMA managers or models or whatever the case may be. And there's a reason for that because you like focusing on maybe the financial planning or the interaction with the clients. You say, hey, okay, I outsource that to someone else. So there's oftentimes, for those of you not already in the RA space, a meaningful chance to increase your profitability by making a change. So the example I'll give is, let's say, this is just very simple numbers. Let's say you are charging your clients a 1% fee for the services that you provide, and you are using a third-party manager, maybe an SMA manager, and that manager is, again, simple numbers here, 50 basis points for the money management. So all into the client is paying 1.5%. Now, mentally you think, well, I'm getting 1% of that, the manager's getting a 0.5% of that. The client doesn't care. All the client knows is they're paying 1.5% and they are getting a certain services and value from you in return. They don't care who gets what portion of the pie. And to the degree they're paying it, they're hopefully satisfied. Okay, the 1.5% I'm paying is worth the value I'm getting in return. So if you're in a kind of a captive situation, you likely have limited options of money management solutions to use. And so again, in this simple example, maybe the kind of money managers you would like to use are only available and it's 50 basis points and that's what's available to you. If you break away and go into the RA space, you have the whole universe of options available to you, different TAMP providers, different money management solutions, different maybe model marketplaces, whatever the case is. And so the thing to think about is, okay, my client already is comfortable paying 1.5% for everything they receive in return. If I go into the RA space, there's no reason I can't continue to charge my client 1.5%. Again, this is just an easy example. And if I can find a way to offer the money management piece for less than it's currently essentially costing you as the advisor provided that 50 basis points. Let's say you can find, because you have much more options available to you in that RA space, for 25 basis points, all of a sudden that delta, that other 25 basis points you just reduced, that can go in your pocket. Now, of course, you could have the option of passing that along some or all to the client, but if the client is comfortable, again, in this example, paying 1.5% for everything they're receiving, if you can replicate that just as well, but do so at a lower cost structure for you, you can find maybe even the same money management solution for less money or a different type of money management solution for less than you're able to access now, maybe in your current wirehouse type situation, well, that savings can flow right to your profitability. So don't think of it as, well, it's only my 1%. No, the client's paying 1.5. The client's hopefully content with paying 1.5. If you can lower the cost structure of what it takes to deliver the services they are receiving for that 1.5, that can flow to you and increase profitability. So think about that from a money management perspective. If you believe in outsourcing, the question to ask yourself is, are there more efficient, less expensive ways I could do it if I was in the RIA space? And again, that's the sort of thing, of course, I help advisors with, is understand, hey, what do you have now? How would you replicate it in the RIA space, and what would that look like, and could that be to your advantage? So just know that that's a meaningful way for some advisors to increase their profitability as well. So to wrap up, I would just remind you, and by the way, again, this was not an exhaustive list. This was trying to identify some of the key pieces of how to increase revenues, how to decrease expenses that are more flexible, more available to you in the RIA space. And just know that the RIA space is a scale game. So the larger the practice you have, the better your economics are going to get. So for instance, because if you've got to the point where your real estate is a fixed cost, well, the larger you grow your practice above covering that fixed expense, the better the profitability gets. So it's a scale game as well. The more you can outsource to someone else and you can grow your firm, again, that's going to increase your revenues, increase your profitability. So always be asking yourself, how can I grow my firm faster? How can I decrease my expenses? And for those of you that are in kind of a captive environment now, that is all going to be generally pretty limited to you, because it for better or worse, certain things are provided for you, take it or leave it. That's the cost structure. In the RIA space, you have way more flexibility to look at the different options out there and say, is there a better way to do this? And hopefully for cheaper. And if there is, that absolutely could be a financial benefit to you. So again, that's the sort of thing I help advisors with, is discover, to say, hey, what's your situation now? What would your practice look like in the RIA space? Does this make sense to be exploring? If it does, how does it work? What options do you have available to you? And how do you make the transition to it? Again, something I help advisors with. Happy to have that conversation with you as well. So if you're not already there, like I said, head on over to transitiontoria.com. You can find all of these episodes in video format, podcast format. Again, I write articles, I have white papers, but the most effective thing to do is at the top of every page is a contact link. Just click on that. You can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me. We can talk about today's subject or anything else RIA related you would like to talk about. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value on today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.